to violence and abuse, anybody?
Oh yeah, I love violence and abuse.
Oh, more for me, please.
So, men are victims of violent crime just under twice as often as women. In the home, the ratio is different, but the general perception propagated by organisations like Women's Aid, who said that in the vast majority of cases, domestic abuse is experienced by women and perpetrated by men, does not reflect any reasonable analysis of reality. Unfortunately, that idea, the idea that is prevalent in our Parliament, and so we have the domestic abuse bill going through at the moment, in which 1% of resources are ring-fenced for men.
Yeah. Yeah.
What can you say about?
Yeah, well, I think that, by the way, the statistics in Scotland are, so the Scottish Crime and Justice Survey on partner abuse found that 17% of women and 10% of men experience physical and psychological partner abuse. But only 20% of reports of domestic abuse come from men. And unfortunately, we here in Scotland live in an absolute matriarchy with Nicola Sturgeon, a devout feminist, and she said in 2016, all violence is wrong, but domestic violence is not gender neutral. The victims are massively, disproportionately women. And the Scottish government, unlike the English, like the British government, they have a gendered definition of domestic abuse. They do say that domestic abuse as gender abuse can be perpetrated by partners. And when they mention sexual abuse, they say sexual abuse, in brackets, acts which denigrate and humiliate women and are perpetrated against their will. So overall, the UK is doing really badly in regard to domestic abuse, but I think Scotland is worse than England and Wales.
Yes.
Which denigrate women. You know, so if you just say to a woman, "You're less than me," that's sexual abuse.
Very much so. Yeah, I think that the whole approach to domestic abuse has been informed by the Duluth model and by feminism from the get-go. In medieval time, even in medieval times, it was very gendered, where a woman that experienced domestic abuse was seen as a victim. I mean, they sometimes didn't get the support that they should have gotten, but a woman was seen as a victim, where a man who experienced domestic abuse was ridiculed. And I think there was the practice putting him the other way around on a donkey, and he was chased through the streets and people threw garbage at him, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no, that was Caravari processions. And so, you know, I mean, they had different standards for what constituted abuse in the Middle Ages. But a woman who was badly beaten by her husband, you know, husband would be punished severely. But yeah, the man who was the victim of his wife's abuse would very often find himself being punished for being a victim by his community. And so, you know, other things that they would do, they would build wicker effigies of the man and burn it. They would dump him in a pond at the end, and they would like bang on pots and pans and make this discordant kind of like racket at the very beginning to wake him up and bring him out of his house. And how much better have we got? I don't know.
I've heard.
I think we're worse.
There was a Daily Beast article that I haven't actually read. I've got it open in my browser, but it's titled something like, it came out yesterday, and it's titled something like "We shouldn't feel sorry for Johnny Depp," and it's like,
Yes, I know.
you know, just can you imagine like someone writing an article about a woman who'd been the victim of abuse, saying like, "We shouldn't feel sorry for her"?
I think Theodore Roosevelt actually got rid of the whipping post, and the reason he got rid of it was because men wouldn't be able to go to work the next day and earn for their family. Otherwise, it was a perfectly reasonable punishment for a man who was caught being domestically abusive. And the thing about, you know, domestic abuse of the past is that we have a profound misunderstanding of what society was like in the past. You know, before we had such fantastic access to the police, you know, and the police can arrive anywhere. They receive a phone call, they can arrive within 10 minutes to a situation. We have safety, we have rules, we have regulations, we have courts. Before all of that, it was seen that essentially the police or the guards or whomever was the local authority would maintain some kind of order among the men. The men would maintain order among the women, and the women would maintain order among the children. And, you know, because they didn't have the resources for one organization like the police to maintain order among everybody. And see, in the past, it was far more commonplace for people to be physical as a reprimand, and I don't agree with that in the slightest, but that is the case, and it's something we have to accept as a social norm. So the police were physical towards criminals, teachers were physical towards children who were, you know, naughty or not keeping up, and yes, domestic abuse was more pronounced, but it was from both sides. You know, it was common that, just like today, if it was going to happen, it would be reciprocal. And we've managed to eliminate a lot of these unfortunate circumstances. So police are not allowed to use violence anymore. The children are not hit in schools. But we look back on men hitting.
That is, sorry, I have to. I think taking people out of their houses, I think putting people into jail, it's violence as well. It's not direct and physical violence, but I do think it's a violent infringement in your life. The police,
well,
if somebody says, "Oh, my husband," Elizabeth?
I was just going to say, you know, surveys have been, and they asked people, would you rather, you know, be whipped X amount of times or spend X amount of time in prison? And a lot of people would rather be physically punished than have their liberty stripped from them.
Yeah.
No, I do.
It's the same.
I completely agree. You know, but for the purpose of this kind of conversation about physical violence specifically, you know, police are not allowed to use, like, corporal punishment. It doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
You know, people look back on the domestic abuse and they say that it was a one-way street, and they say, how could men love women if they were prepared to hit them? And what never seems to occur to them is, well, how could women love children if they were prepared to hit them? Women and men were perfectly capable of smacking their children quite severely in times gone by. You know, it was seen as the norm, and it wasn't okay. But why do we isolate the men versus women and nothing else? Why do we remove it from all the context around it?
And violence from women towards men must have been commonplace in the past, because otherwise the whole thing of the woman handling like kitchen tools towards wouldn't be such commonplace. I mean, you saw it everywhere. If it's not based on some kind of reality, why was it portrayed everywhere? So I think violence from women towards men was absolutely acceptable and normalized even in the past.
Well, it still is. I mean, you know, how many times in a comedy will a man say something stupid and a woman smacks them?
Absolutely.
I was watching the Simpsons movie the other day, and they go to a carnival to earn a motorbike, and Homer gets it. And the carnival, the person who was responsible for that particular kind of gimmick, he says, "Oh, my wives are going to kill me." And it cuts to a pair of Siamese twins, but they're beating a rolling pin against their hand, with the implication that when he goes home, she's going to beat him with an instrument. And it's like, why is that funny?
Yeah. Yeah, I do think that the situation men find themselves in nowadays in regards to domestic violence might be the worst they've ever been, because there is so much support for everybody else, and the system is so built against them. You can't trust the police, you can't trust services. Even the men supporting services like Respect are actually are misandressed, and like in their toolkit it says one of the main reasons for men experiencing domestic abuse is their toxic masculinity. So if everybody who should support you actually rams you a knife in your back potentially, I think that's the worst it's ever been, because in the past you had to endure domestic but at least there wasn't the pretense that all victims would get help. Now you pretend, but then your children are being taken away. This is happening to you. You end up on the street, and the system is against you. I find it absolutely
appalling. What really grinds my gears is that we almost have like victims when it comes to the different sides of the argument. They're almost treated like a commodity, like it's an arms race to have more victims, because the best estimate are that it's 60-40 in terms of domestic violence between the genders, but as you said, Liz, it's 99-1 in terms of the help for women. But like, it's feminists seem to have this perspective that if they can have more victims, then they deserve all of the resources, and it becomes, rather than it being about society versus criminals, rather than it being about all of us trying to help the victims, all of us against the minority of abusers, it's men against women, and it's like women are saying to men, or feminists at least, are saying to men, you have to take responsibility for all the men that are abusers. And then, MRAs will come back, well, you have to take responsibility for all the women that are abusers. No, we don't, because it's not our crime. All of society should be split into innocents and criminals, not into men and women.
Right.
No, but the thing is, it's not just about criminals and innocents, because 60% of domestic abuse, is perpetrated by both and experienced by both. It's toxic relationship. I think this whole view of there are evil people and there are innocent people should be turned into there are relationships, and some relationships need a lot of help, and some of them shouldn't be together. But that needs to be assessed over a process. I think there should be just way more free support for couples to deal with toxic relationships and mental health.
But I feel as if, sorry, Liz. Sorry. I feel as if, like, for example, if you see Johnny Depp as a great example, a very prominent example of a man being abused by a woman, the MRAs can be like, oh, great, I'm going to grab that because it's good for my argument. And if feminists see an example of a woman who's beaten by a man, they say, oh, great, I'm going to grab that because it's a great example of my argument. I feel as if we're both using victims as commodities rather than being united against the illness that is domestic abuse. We seem to have a schism down the middle which shouldn't exist.
I agree.
I mean, as an MRA, I reject that hypothesis. I've consistently argued for male victims to have the support available that they need, you know, on a kind of equitable basis, with women having that support available, you know, and that includes far more beds in refuges and beds that they can go to with their children, because, you know, they have hardly any beds, but they have 0 beds if they need to bring the children. And, you know, I also, what I'm concerned about, because, you know, like Philip, I don't think there are evil people, you know, I think evil people are incredibly rare. I think what there are people who have difficulties regulating their emotions and their behaviour. And one of the things that we do when we gender the conversation about domestic violence is we fail to provide the support that female perpetrators need. Because I don't think women who, you know, are getting away with being abusive to their partners are happy people who want to continue doing what they're doing. I think they're people who need support to get better.
But I think they should get support as a couple. I think it should, like, they should take away this whole, this is the perpetrator needs to go to a program, and the victim, if it's a victim, is sitting at home and doesn't have to do anything. You have to do it. If you're a couple, you have to do it together. And I saw a version of the Duluth model, gay couples. It freaked me out, because it literally said, it was like, you are the victim, partner was the perpetrator, you are right in everything, he is wrong in everything, he has to respect all of your needs, and if he doesn't respect your needs, you have to pretty much destroy him. It wasn't even just for women against men. In gay relationships, the Duluth model was just, there is a bad person, there is a good person, and the good person deserves everything, and you can actually torture emotionally your partner. It was horrifying, absolutely horrifying.
Yeah, I mean, you know, even in a situation where there is a perpetrator and a victim, and, you know, the perpetrator is significantly malevolent, at the very least, there's a reason why the victim got with that partner, and they need help to kind of sort out what went on there.
Absolutely.
Can I ask you, Liz, do you think it would be fair for men to say that they, like any given man, to say, I will not be with a woman does not deserve to be with me if she doesn't actively reject things like this? You know, because it does feel as if the government has gone around and like armed women with a gun, and men, you know, it's beholden to them to say, I don't want to live a life with you unless you give that gun up.
As a mother of sons, absolutely. You know, I try to drill into my children that there are, you know, behaviours that they absolutely shouldn't accept, whether or not wider society accepts them. You know, I also wanted to come back, though, with Philip, when you said that now is like the worst time for male victims of abuse, because I would say that actually now is significantly better than 2 or 3 years ago. You know, I think that society is becoming less tolerant of abuse against men, and male victims are being invited into the conversation. You know, not by feminists, and not by the government, and not by the mainstream media so much, but by the public. And, you know, whilst, if there's anyone listening to this who is a man or is concerned about a man who's a victim of interpersonal violence, I wouldn't recommend calling Respect, because, you know, their whole idea is that their phone line is there to screen out people who claim they're victims but are really perpetrators. And so what you will find is a big list of gotcha questions trying to paint you as a guy. But there is Mankind. You know, Mankind have a great helpline, and they can signpost you to services that you need and help you.
And men in Scotland, AMIS.
Right.
AMIS, they exist as well.
Can I bring up, you know, a personal interaction at university when I was sitting down with the head of the department to discuss, you know, my opinions in the class. And I said that to her that, you know, some of the things that had been, other people had said in class, I'd felt were quite aggressive. And she said, okay, give me an example. And I said that one of the girls, when we had been discussing ways to stop rape, one of the girls said, well, the solution to rape is for men to stop being arseholes. And the teacher said, there's that argument, certainly. And I said to the head of the department, that was a very aggressive, misandrous thing to say. And she said, no, men should stop being arseholes. It would solve most of the problems. And I said, but rape is gender neutral. And she said, no, rape isn't gender neutral. And I said, well, I was abused by a woman. And she said, okay, but your very particular opinion is based on your very particular experience. So basically she was telling me that I was wrong to think that women could abuse. And it was my misunderstanding was based on the fact that I'd been abused by a woman.
Yeah.
They will tell it straight to your face. You know, anything that they claim, you know, victim shaming or victim blaming, anything that they claim that women go through, they will do to men. If a man says it's not fair to say that men are the problem here, they will say, oh, well, that's just your opinion, but you don't know anything, regardless of whether you've been through it or not.
By the way, had you asked Elizabeth a question regarding being in a relationship with a woman that doesn't reject that. Well, I was in a relationship with a girl, wonderful person, but there was a situation where I'm going to simplify it. Let's say where I accidentally bumped into her, and she completely overreacted. And I said, "Oh, sorry for that." And she went into the corner, went like this, and she was like, she started crying. And I knew that she had never experienced domestic abuse in her life before, and her parents didn't have any domestic abuse. And in the end, it came out that she was brainwashed into being so hypersensitive to any physical thing. Like everybody said, oh, if a man ever hits you, then this is the worst thing that could ever happen to you in your life. And she completely misconceptualized the situation. And I asked her if we should break up right there and then. We didn't break up in that situation, but my immediate reaction was like, I think we should break up because I will never feel safe around you. Because if you misinterpret a situation like this as potential abuse, and I told her, I think you should talk to your friends about that. And she said, oh, I can't talk to my friends about it. And I was like, why not? And she said, because they will assume that something really bad happened and that I'm underplaying it. And I'm like, well, then you either need different friends or you are not sure about yourself. You're not sure about the situation or yourself or about me. And I said, yeah, I don't feel safe with you because you're too fragile. You're so brainwashed into seeing men as potential perpetrators. And she wasn't a feminist at all.
No, I mean, that's so many, women who go from feminist to anti-feminist. And I always wanted to ask, how many feminists do you see becoming anti-feminists? How many anti-feminists do you see becoming feminists? It seems to be a one-way street. But the women who go from feminism to anti-feminism tend to be, they have this enormous grudge against feminism because they feel as if feminism stole a huge part of their innocence and their youth from them. They spent so many years being afraid of men, being angry at men, being resentful of men, only to find out that men weren't attacking them. Yeah. And that is psychological abuse. I used to say, if I said to my nephew, there's a monster in the closet and every night the monster's going to get you and it's getting closer and closer and closer and closer, he would be terrified. he would have nightmares. It would be traumatic for him. And
Yeah.
I would be wrong. I would be an abuser to do that to him. And when feminists do it to women, to say you've got a 1 in 4 chance, of being raped on a college campus, that is obscene to lie to somebody like that. Women are going through enormous amounts of anxiety and stress because they're being gaslit, as the feminists would say.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.